It's Emily OFC Podfic. Flashpoint. Written by It's Emily OFC. Read by It's Emily OFC. Chapter 3. Tenzō sipped his champagne nervously and adjusted the knot of his tie for perhaps the 100th time that evening. He had never been one to wear formal clothes, and the suit he was in felt suffocating and stiff against his skin. He knew that this party was an opportunity he shouldn't squander. Leadership from the department were present, and if he ever hoped to be transferred to a station that suited him better than Station 10, he needed to start shopping his name around. It was hard, though, with no ally who could make an introduction for him. He wasn't the most outgoing individual, and, so far, in the first hour of the party, he'd yet to work up the courage to strike up a conversation with anyone, and instead had hung lamely around the buffet table, nursing his now room-temperature glass of bubbly. He'd spotted his crewmates, of course, but he was still such a misfit, and the last thing he wanted was for anyone from leadership to associate him with the rest of his team at Station 10. Jiraiya was in his line of sight at this particular moment in time. Tenzō had seen him go back and forth to the bar more times than was probably advisable, and he was now exuberantly chatting up a young, buxom woman whose own glowing cheeks implied a similar level of intoxication. It was hard to say if she was enjoying the conversation or not, and Tenzō didn't want to be caught staring, so he stopped trying to figure it out. The party was lavish, in his opinion. Either the Commonwealth of Delaware allocated far more funding to their fire departments than did Colorado, or the Wilmington Fire Department had been on the receiving end of some hefty donations this year. The open bar, the catered food, and the small 5-piece band filling the room with jazzy renditions of Christmas classics created an upscale atmosphere that only served to make Tenzō more uncomfortable. Tenzō sighed. Maybe this whole thing had been a mistake. He had been miserable in Colorado, but at least it had been a comfortable, predictable sort of misery. Now he was just as lonely as he had been there, but with the added anxiety of a crew that hated him and all of the unpredictableness that came with that. He had thought that, maybe with a fresh start, he'd be able to advance in his career. His department in Denver had been run like a dynasty, with nobody who wasn't related to someone in leadership ever getting a promotion. He'd harbored hopes of promotion to lieutenant out here on the East Coast, but the thought of Abizu ever recommending him to take the test was laughable. Tenzō hadn't met anyone more insecure about their rank in his life, and he was sure the man would do anything to protect it and avoid competition. Discarding his drink on one of the unused tables, Tenzō made his way across the room and ducked down the hallway that led to the bathrooms. He just needed a moment to catch his breath. Maybe splash some water on his face or something. Just a break of some sort. Then he would definitely get back out there and make some introductions. Before turning into the men's room, though, Tenzō noticed the glass doors on the parallel side of the hallway. Veranda, the sign above them read, though Tenzō could only see the reflection of the opulent hallway in the panes. Tenzō looked both ways down the hall and saw no one. There wouldn't be anyone to miss him if he just stepped outside for a bit, and maybe the fresh air would do him some good. Resolved, Tenzō pushed open one of the doors. He was immediately rewarded with the relief of the frigid December air on his face. It was sweeter even than that first breath of clean air after taking off his mask at the end of a job. Honestly, forced social events were scarier to Tenzō than any blaze he'd ever encountered. The veranda was long but shallow, and it only took Tenzō 2 strides to reach the railing. He leaned over it, the cold iron seeping through his suit, but not in an uncomfortable way. The banquet room the party was being held at was on the 4th floor of this particular hotel, and so the view from the veranda was a fairly impressive one, the inky black night pierced by the festive holiday lights adorning the other buildings on the city block. Tenzō could have stayed there the rest of the night, his breath coming out in puffs of white steam, the distant jazzy sounds of the band seeping through the glass doors. But that would have been a waste, of course. "You've got to get back in there," Tenzō chastised himself, his voice ringing out into the empty night. "You can do it." Despite his own words, he didn't move from his spot at the railing. He sighed, letting his head fall forward in defeat. "Seriously," he tried again, "just do it. Maybe Jiraiya will give you an introduction. He might be drunk enough for that, right?" Tenzō tapped his fingers on the cold iron indecisively. "That bad, huh?" A stranger's voice assaulted Tenzō's ears, and he jumped, whipping his head to the right to see what he had missed before his eyes had been adjusted to the night. Someone else, a man, leaning against the railing just as he was, half shadowed by the building. He had been there the whole time, Tenzō realized, his cheeks burning in embarrassment hot enough that he feared his whole body might be steaming. "Sorry," Tenzō blurted out, hands flying off the railing as if it were suddenly hot to the touch. "I didn't know anyone else was out here." The stranger chuckled softly and took a few steps in his direction, moving out of the shadows so that Tenzō could see him properly. "Don't worry about it," he said lightly. "But can I offer you a word of advice?" In the light, Tenzō determined that the stranger was about his age, though it was hard to say for sure since his hair was an uncommon silvery white, probably bleached. He was wearing a well-tailored peacoat over a suit, and Tenzō noted that he had on a pair of leather gloves as well, as if he had been planning on being outside from the start. His skin was pale, but the apples of his cheeks and the tip of his nose were cherry red, implying that, indeed, he had been outside for quite some time. He was attractive, Tenzō thought. "Sure," Tenzō answered after too long a pause. "Don't let Jiraiya introduce you to anyone," the man said. "Especially if he's drunk." Tenzō laughed despite himself and felt a small amount of tension ease out of his shoulders as he did. "So you know Captain Jiraiya?" he asked. "For better or worse, I know almost everyone in the department. Mostly for worse," the man answered. "You're better off having one of your crewmates introduce you," he suggested. Tenzō bit the inside of his lip, looking away. Yeah, unfortunately, they hate me." He couldn't quite explain why he would admit such a thing to a stranger. He didn't even know this guy's rank or what station he worked at. Something about the intimacy of the veranda and the small knowing smile on the man's face was putting him at ease, though. "Oh?" the man asked, stepping forward once more. They were now side by side, familiar, like old friends might be. "Why's that?" Tenzō shrugged, turning his attention back to the view of the city. "I transferred from out of state. Things were different at my old station. No one here takes me seriously." It felt good to say it out loud, to have someone listening. "Ah," the stranger said in apparent understanding. "They're hazing you." Tenzō looked up at the man next to him. His smile had grown, and his eyes were closed now, forming two mirthful crescents lined with eyelashes the same silvery white as his, apparently not bleached, hair. "What?" Tenzō asked. "No, I don't think so. This isn't a college fraternity, it's a fire station." He shook his head as he spoke. The man opened his eyes and cocked his head a bit, looking suddenly to Tenzō very much like a curious dog. "Do they tease you to try to get a reaction out of you? Do they pretend they don't know how to do basic tasks?" he asked. "Well," Tenzō started, brow furrowing. "Do they pretend they haven't learned your name yet?" the man continued. "They're faking that?" Tenzō sputtered before he could stop himself, and the man next to him laughed. The sound was carefree and musical, and it sapped the frustration right out of Tenzō as it rung in his ears. "You've got to give it right back to them," the man said confidently. Tenzō frowned. "What do you mean?" "Tease them back," he said. "It's the only way." Tenzō believed the man, but he wasn't sure he had it in him. It just wasn't in his nature. But if he couldn't, did that mean it would be like this forever? At any station he transferred to? It was a scary thought. Just then, the door to Tenzō's left was flung open, and out onto the veranda toppled Asuma, lips locked with a dark-haired woman Tenzō didn't recognize. The woman appeared to register Tenzō's presence momentarily before locking on the man beside him, and he saw her eyes widen as she extricated herself from Asuma's grasp. "Lieutenant, sorry, we didn't know anyone else was out here," she exclaimed, more than a little breathless. Tenzō glanced quickly back at the man by his side. So this man was a lieutenant at another station, huh? "No harm, no foul, Kurenai," the lieutenant said, lifting his hands in placation. Asuma exchanged a grin with the lieutenant that gave Tenzō the impression they knew each other. "Oh hey, new guy!" Asuma exclaimed then, apparently having only just noticed Tenzō. The glassy look in his eyes provided a possible explanation for the slow reaction time. "Couldn't take the heat in there, huh? Hiding outside?" Tenzō clenched his teeth in annoyance and was prepared to head back inside without responding, but a gloved hand fell heavily on his shoulder and he could read the lieutenant's intended message loud and clear. He felt his heart racing as he did it, but imbued with confidence of unknown origin, Tenzō straightened up and let whatever came to his mind first fall from his lips. "I thought I'd do you a favor, Asuma," he said, voice surprisingly even. "Even with an open bar, you wouldn't have had a chance in hell with the ladies with me in the room." Asuma's grin faded. Kurenai blushed in embarrassment. The hand on Tenzō's shoulder squeezed. He could hardly hear the faint music of the party over his own speeding pulse. Had he just completely fucked up? And then it happened. Asuma doubled over in laughter. Not a mean sort of laughter, but an appreciative kind. As he straightened up, he slid a hand around Kurenai's waist and tugged her back towards the door into the building. He grabbed the handle with his free hand and pulled the door open, calling back over his shoulder, "Not bad, Tenzō, not bad." Tenzō's name had never sounded more victorious to his ears, and he couldn't help but turn and grin at the lieutenant next to him. As he turned, though, he saw that the man was already making his own way to the door as well. "Hey," he called. "You're leaving?" The man smiled that same eyes-closed smile at him again, and Tenzō noted for the second time how attractive he was. "I'm not much for parties," he said. "I'm headed home. But you get in there. Talk to people. You'll be fine." Tenzō let out a breathy laugh, feeling almost giddy from his first time teasing someone. "Right. Hey, thank you," he said, hoping the sincerity was evident in his voice. "Don't worry about it," the lieutenant said, stepping back inside and leaving Tenzō alone on the veranda. It's Emily OFC Podfic.